count backward from 10. 9, 8, 7. And before you even reach 6, you're gone. Not asleep, gone. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. If a surgeon opened your body during a normal night's sleep, you would wake up screaming. Sleep doesn't protect you from pain. So whatever is happening to you under anesthesia is not rest. It is something else entirely, something science still cannot fully name. For a few hours, your brain is functionally disconnected from reality. You are not here. But you are not there either. You are, for lack of a better word, nowhere. For over 170 years, doctors have been chemically switching off the human mind before every single major surgery on the planet. And yet, if you corner the world's top consciousness researchers and ask them exactly where you go during those missing hours, the honest answer is that they still don't fully know. Today, we're stepping into that void. We're going to take apart the biological pause button, hiding inside your own skull. And along the way, we're going to sit with a genuinely disturbing possibility. That anesthesia doesn't just put you to sleep. It might be switching off yourself completely, and then, somehow, building it back from scratch. Before we go deeper into this, I want to ask you for something quick. This channel exists for exactly this kind of question. The ones about who we are, what consciousness actually is, and how strange the human body really is once you stop taking it for granted. If that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night in the best possible way, hit subscribe right now and join us. We're working toward our next big subscriber goal, and every single one of you clicking that button is what keeps these deep dives possible. All right, let's get back into the dark. Let's clear up the biggest misconception first, because almost everyone gets this wrong, including plenty of people who have actually been under anesthesia themselves. Anesthesia is not sleep. It only sounds like sleep because anesthesiologists gently tell you to go to sleep now, right before they push the drugs, which is really just a kindness. A softer way of saying, we are about to shut down your entire conscious experience. Because nobody wants to hear that phrase seconds before surgery. But on a brain scan, natural sleep and anesthetic unconsciousness looks almost nothing alike. During a normal night of sleep, your brain is anything but quiet. It cycles through distinct stages: light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, each with its own signature pattern of electrical activity. Your brain stays busy the entire night, sorting memories, running simulations you experience as dreams, and staying just alert enough to snap you awake if something loud or dangerous happens nearby. Anesthesia throws that entire cycling process out the window. There is no cycling. There are no stages. The brain drops into one relatively stable, heavily suppressed pattern and simply stays there, flatlined, in a sense, until the drugs are metabolized out of your system. It is less like drifting off to sleep, and more like someone reaching directly into your skull and turning very specific dials all the way down to zero. Think of your brain as a massive, glittering city at night. Ordinary sleep is that city quieting down, fewer lights, less traffic, but the power grid is still humming, still fully connected. Anesthesia is something far more drastic. It is someone walking into the control room and cutting the power lines connecting every building to every other building all at once. The city technically still exists. The buildings are still standing, but nothing in that city can coordinate, communicate, or function together as a whole anymore. That, as unsettling as it sounds, is a far more accurate picture of what is actually happening inside your head than you're just sleeping. To get a patient from fully awake to that fractured, disconnected state, anesthesiologists manage an incredibly precise juggling act built on three separate pillars, and if any one of them is even slightly miscalibrated, the experience can go wrong in genuinely disturbing ways. The first pillar is analgesia, blocking pain signals from ever reaching conscious awareness. The second is amnesia, making sure that even if a fragment of experience slips through, no memory of it forms. The third is akinesia, keeping the body still through a separate paralytic agent. Here's the unsettling part. Most people never think about unconsciousness, and the inability to move are not automatically the same thing biologically, even though they usually travel together. If the dosing or timing on any one of these components drifts out of sync, you can end up with the paralytic working flawlessly while the unconsciousness component isn't fully doing its job. This is a real documented phenomenon called anesthesia awareness, and estimates suggest it happens in roughly 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 surgeries, a number that sounds small until you remember how many surgeries happen worldwide every single day. Most reported cases involve fuzzy fragments, muffled sounds, a vague sense of pressure. But in rarer, far more disturbing cases, patients have reported feeling actual surgical pain while completely paralyzed and unable to signal it to anyone in the room, about as close to a real-life nightmare as modern medicine still occasionally produces. The integration problem. Where does you actually go so if it isn't sleep? And it isn't simply the brain switching off. What is anesthesia actually doing to consciousness itself? Different anesthetic drugs target completely different receptors and pathways in the brain, yet they all seem to converge on roughly the same outcome. Researchers using EEG monitoring during surgery have consistently found that anesthetic drugs disrupt something called functional connectivity. The brain's ability to coordinate and share information between different regions in real time. Different regions effectively stop talking to each other, becoming isolated little islands of activity that can no longer integrate into anything resembling a single unified conscious experience. This connects directly to one of the leading modern theories of consciousness, known as integrated information theory. The basic premise is that consciousness isn't produced by any one single brain region acting alone. It emerges from the brain's ability to weave enormous amounts of information together across many regions simultaneously, taking countless separate signals and fusing them into one coherent, unified experience of being you. Anesthesia appears to specifically target and disrupt exactly that integration process. Individual brain regions might still technically be active, still processing some signals, still generating electrical activity of their own. But they are no longer talking to each other in any way that produces a single captain sitting at the wheel, observing and experiencing anything at all. You become, in a very real sense, a collection of disconnected parts with no unified observer left to witness them. This is where the story takes a genuinely strange turn, one that pushes past standard neuroscience into territory some physicists find almost too provocative to say out loud. A small but serious group of researchers, including the physicist Sir Roger Penrose, have proposed that consciousness might not be a purely electrical phenomenon confined to neurons firing back and forth. Instead, they suggest it could have a quantum mechanical component rooted in microscopic structures inside neurons called microtubules. Under this theory, certain anesthetic drugs don't just dampen electrical signaling, they may also interfere directly with quantum-level activity inside these microtubules. If even part of this idea holds up, anesthesia isn't simply flipping a biological switch. It might be flipping a quantum one. momentarily collapsing your consciousness back into some more fundamental layer of the universe, only to reassemble it once the drugs wear off. This remains a fringe, heavily debated idea, and plenty of mainstream researchers are skeptical. But it's exactly the kind of idea that turns a routine medical procedure into one of the strangest open questions in modern science. Not every anesthetic works this way, and one drug in particular breaks the pattern entirely: ketamine. Unlike most general anesthetics, which primarily suppress brain activity and disrupt integration between regions, ketamine produces something known as a dissociative state. Patients frequently report a strange sensation of separation between mind and body, a floating feeling, a sense of detachment from physical pain, occasionally vivid, dreamlike imagery that feels distinctly different from ordinary dreaming or even from other anesthetic experiences. Researchers studying ketamine's mechanism have found that it primarily targets receptors involved in regulating communication between the thalamus and the cortex, essentially disrupting the brain's sensory relay system rather than uniformly suppressing activity across the entire brain. Some regions go quiet while others become unusually active and disorganized, which may explain why ketamine experiences are described in such vivid, occasionally bizarre terms compared to the more straightforward blankness most patients report with other general anesthetics. This naturally raises one of the most contentious questions in this entire field. Is there a genuine overlap between anesthesia and near-death experiences? Some researchers have pointed out striking similarities between certain reported features of near-death experiences, particularly the sensation of floating, detachment from pain, and vivid imagery, and the specific dissociative effects produced by ketamine and closely related compounds. A few scientists have even proposed that under extreme physiological stress, the brain might naturally produce internal compounds or activate pathways that mimic these same dissociative anesthetic effects, essentially triggering its own version of a ketamine-like state during a genuine biological crisis. This remains a genuinely open, actively debated corner of research rather than a settled scientific conclusion. But it's a fascinating thread connecting two topics that, on the surface, seem to have nothing in common at all. Here is one of the most genuinely mind-bending aspects of the entire topic: the total disappearance of subjective time. Patients under properly administered general anesthesia consistently report experiencing zero passage of time. Not that went by fast. An actual, complete absence of any felt duration whatsoever. A 4-hour surgery and a 40-minute procedure feel completely identical from the inside, because there is no inside experiencing any duration at all during that window. This is meaningfully different from a dreamless night's sleep, where most people still retain some vague, fuzzy sense that time passed, even if they can't recall the specifics. Under true general anesthesia, that vague sense of duration simply never forms, because the brain machinery responsible for tracking and later recalling time appears to be specifically and thoroughly disrupted, not merely dialed down. Researchers point to structures involved in memory formation, particularly the hippocampus, as playing a central role here. Anesthesia doesn't just suppress your ability to perceive things in the moment. It also actively blocks the formation of new memories during that entire window, even for any stray fragments of awareness that might technically occur. This is a deliberate, engineered feature of how many anesthetic drugs work, not a side effect. It's why, even in rare cases of partial anesthesia awareness, Many patients who did experience some level of consciousness during surgery genuinely have no memory of it afterward, which is simultaneously a small mercy and a deeply strange thing to sit with once you really think it through. There's one specific brain structure that keeps coming up in this research as something close to a gatekeeper for consciousness itself: the thalamus, THALAMUS. It functions as a central relay station, gathering sensory information from your entire body and routing it up to the cortex, where that raw information finally gets processed into something resembling conscious perception. Many general anesthetics appear to specifically suppress thalamic activity, effectively cutting off the relay station, rather than shutting down the entire communication network all at once. Some researchers describe this as less like turning off a house's electricity and more like disconnecting the house entirely from the power grid outside. The internal wiring might technically still be capable of carrying a charge here and there, but nothing meaningful is getting through from the outside world anymore. It's a subtle but important distinction, because it suggests your cortex, the part of the brain most associated with thinking, perceiving, and constructing a coherent sense of self, might still technically be doing something during anesthesia. It has simply been cut off from the steady stream of sensory input it would normally rely on to build any kind of conscious experience out of. The most genuinely miraculous part of this entire process isn't going under. It's coming back. Coming out of general anesthesia is not an instant, clean return to full consciousness. It's a gradual, sometimes genuinely chaotic process where different brain functions come back online at noticeably different speeds. Basic reflexes and motor function often return relatively quickly, while higher-order cognitive functions, coherent speech, sharp thinking, accurate short-term memory, can lag behind significantly, sometimes by hours. This is exactly why patients say bizarre, occasionally hilarious things right after surgery, asking the same question over and over, reacting with dramatic emotion to something completely mundane, or confidently insisting on things that are obviously untrue. Stop. None of that is a personality glitch or a sign that something went wrong. It's simply a brain rebooting different systems on different timelines, with judgment, filtering, and coherent memory formation generally being among the very last systems to fully come back online. There's also a notable age-related pattern worth mentioning. Older patients face a meaningfully higher risk of something called post-operative cognitive dysfunction, a temporary, sometimes lingering period of confusion and reduced mental clarity that can occasionally persist for days or weeks. Researchers suspect this comes down to differences in how aging brains reestablish functional connectivity, making the entire coming back online process slower and noticeably bumpier for older patients compared to younger ones. Because we can't simply ask an unconscious brain whether it's genuinely unconscious. Modern medicine has built increasingly sophisticated tools to try to answer that question anyway. Devices that track brain activity in real time during surgery, often condensing processed EEG data into a single number, representing depth of unconsciousness, have become far more common specifically to reduce the risk of anesthesia awareness. Individual variation plays a much bigger role here than most people realize too. Genetic differences, metabolism speed, and prior tolerance from chronic substance use have all been studied as factors that meaningfully shift how much anesthetic any given person actually needs to reach the same depth of unconsciousness as someone else, a genuinely unsettling category of medical mystery. that anesthesiologists account for through careful, continuous monitoring rather than a single fixed dose for every patient. Do you briefly stop existing? Now let's sit with the bigger, uncomfortable question underneath everything we've just covered, because it's the part of this topic that tends to stay with people long after the video ends. If anesthesia genuinely disrupts the brain's ability to integrate information into one unified conscious experience, does that mean you, in some meaningful philosophical sense, briefly cease to exist during that window, only to be reconstructed afterward by a continuous physical brain that never actually stopped running its basic biological processes underneath? This question sits right at the uncomfortable intersection of neuroscience and philosophy of mind. And it doesn't have a fully settled answer, largely because it depends heavily on which theory of consciousness you personally find most convincing. If consciousness really is fundamentally about integration, about countless signals being woven together into one unified thread of experience, then anesthesia represents something genuinely closer to a temporary cessation of you specifically, rather than simply a period of reduced awareness. It's a genuinely strange thought to sit with, especially the next time you're filling out pre-surgery paperwork in a waiting room. And yet, despite that unsettling implication, the practical lived experience of anesthesia consistently feels completely seamless to the person going through it. There's no perceived gap, no felt sense of having been gone, no existential dread experienced in real time, because the very mechanism that disrupts your conscious experience during anesthesia is the exact same mechanism that prevents you from ever forming a memory of that disruption in the first place. From the inside, it simply feels like a sentence that got interrupted mid-word and then picked right back up again, with absolutely no felt sense of the gap in between. So, where do you actually go under anesthesia? Based on everything current neuroscience can tell us, the honest answer is genuinely unsatisfying in the best possible way. You probably don't go anywhere in any literal sense at all. Your brain doesn't transport your consciousness to some quiet alternate dimension. It doesn't tuck your mind away into some kind of protective storage. And for the vast majority of patients under properly administered anesthesia, it almost certainly isn't running some unified dream state quietly in the background the entire time. Instead, the specific networks and connections responsible for generating your continuous, unified sense of being. You simply stop functioning together in any coordinated way for a while. And when those connections come back online afterward, often messily, often slowly, sometimes producing genuinely strange transitional behavior along the way, the resulting experience feels, from the inside, like absolutely nothing happened at all. Maybe that's the most fitting way to end this entire discussion. We spend an enormous amount of energy trying to figure out exactly where consciousness goes during anesthesia, treating it almost like a missing persons case. But the far stranger and more scientifically interesting answer might simply be that consciousness doesn't go anywhere at all. It just temporarily stops being assembled. The same way a puzzle doesn't go anywhere when you scatter its pieces across a table. It simply stops being a recognizable picture until someone carefully puts it back together again. Anesthesia might be the closest any of us will ever get to non-existence while still technically being alive, and it proves something genuinely humbling. That our entire sense of identity, the you, reading this sentence right now, is a remarkably fragile chemical and electrical construct, rebuilt fresh every single time you wake up. So the next time someone asks you to count backward from 10, remember, you're not just going to sleep. You're stepping right up to the edge of what it actually means to be a conscious human being and trusting an extraordinary piece of modern science to bring you safely back from it. If this video pulled you into the mystery even a little, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Subscribe, join the community, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.